Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.
Ari Paparo, founder of Marketecture.tv and former Google exec, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely looking forward to it. All right, let me frame this up a little bit, and then we can jump into some questions and thoughts. Love to hear about your background, all these lovely things. So today we uncover how Google rose to prominence by speaking with Ari, who reveals the untold story of how the company quietly seized control of digital advertising and why it matters for the future of journalism, business, and democracy. This is all revealed in the forthcoming book, Yield: How Google Bought, Built, and Bullied Its Way to Advertising Dominance. All right, there's a lot going on there, and we all know Google. We know some of the stories behind the scenes, but we don't know all of them. So we kind of want to uncrack some of this stuff if we possibly can. So Ari, first and foremost, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, what
Sure.
led you down this path, and of course, writing the book.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the ad technology sector for about 20 years. I worked at a company called DoubleClick, which is featured in the book and was Google's, I think, second largest acquisition at the time. They acquired it in, I guess, 2008 or so. Um, and and since then, I've been an executive at various ad tech companies. I founded my own company called Beeswax, which we sold to Comcast in 2021. And I currently am having sort of a second career as a journalist, podcaster, expert in the area, trying to share some of my knowledge, have a little bit of fun in marketecture, which is like what you do, is sort of an informative take on advertising.
Fantastic. My goodness. Well, that's great to hear. So what I'd love to hear a little bit more about is, based on your experience, having been in this space for quite some time now, what is happening? What has happened? And where is the
Sure.
foundation and where are we going from here?
Yeah. So when we talk about Google, obviously what comes to mind is search. And the Google search product, when it came out in the early 2000s, was one of the most revolutionary products ever built, changed the world, I think it's fair to say. And that's where the majority of the company's revenue still comes from. I'm looking at something totally different, right? So Google built this multi-billion-dollar search business, and then at some point they said, well, what about all those ads on websites and on your TV and on your phone? What about that, where it's a pretty different experience for the advertiser and the consumer? And this book in my history is the story of that market becoming very technologically driven, not just sales and ads driven, but really one word for it would be financialized. It became like the stock market, and an ordinary publisher trying to sell some ads on their website would be using technology akin to what Goldman Sachs uses to buy and sell ads,
Wow.
buy and sell securities.
Right.
And that's really this like 2 decade long march. And it shouldn't be surprising that at becoming technologically based opened the door for technology companies, namely Google, to sort of take it over. And that's really what I've been experiencing for my career, but also what I wrote about.
So tell us a little bit more about that. For some people that actually aren't buying advertising, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What are they doing when they're doing this?
Yeah, so a website loads or an app. It's the same technology basically. Website loads, and you need to figure out what ads should show up on the page very, very quickly. So quickly that the consumer doesn't notice them loading, and that's surprisingly complicated because the same web page might be a totally different ad experience for you than it is for your mother or for someone in a different country. The exact same content but different ads, and the way that happens is that the page loads, and then various technologies run auctions. They basically broadcast out in real time a message that says, what's the page? What does the user's cookie look like? What time of day is it? What browser are they? A bunch of other stuff. And gives the buyers on the other side very short amounts of time to respond. It could be 150 milliseconds to respond and say, yes, I want this ad and I'm willing to pay $1.50 CPM or something like that. And then the web page needs to take all of those bids and figure out which is the best ad to show, and then show the ad. And that all has to happen in, a total of under, about 500 milliseconds. So it's pretty amazing that it works. And it's way faster and higher volume than any other sort of technical system, including the stock market.
It's amazing to hear that. So thank you for going through that. One of the parts that I've always been curious about is why. Why? I mean, clearly people go to search on Google because it's a default, just like they're now going to OpenAI and ChatGPT for that, and that's the default. Even though there's all these others that are out there that are probably as good, some are as good, if not better, depending on the moment in time, because they switch. How come there's not been an organization that has been able to build something akin to that and have some sort of advantage? Like, why has there not ever been? Why is it that Google is so dominant in this space?
Right. So this is what I talk about in the book, which is it comes down to the DoubleClick acquisition. So DoubleClick is sort of a forgotten company that was really big in the first .com boom in the 90s. It was really the only survivor from New York. There was Silicon Alley in New York versus Silicon Valley, and Silicon Alley had a lot of great companies, but really none of them survived the bust except for DoubleClick. And what DoubleClick did was it provided software for publishers and advertisers to manage their ads. This is called ad serving software. Probably many of you listeners have run into this software at some point. It's like content management for ads. And the reality is that this software is pretty complicated. It's not something you can roll your own. There's very little open source. You really have to use a commercial vendor, and it's really complicated. And through a lot of product development, acquisitions, et cetera, DoubleClick ended up being effectively a majority provider. I think at the time of the acquisition by Google, it had 60% market share, meaning 60% of publishers used this software to put ads on their web pages and their apps and stuff like that. It's currently up to 90%. Just
oh my goodness, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so in the U.S., 90% of all web pages and all, I think all ads are run using the Google ad server. And so when you have the ad server and you're the tech that's going to actually make the decision about what ad should show on the page, the last decision, you can also find out things like what's the price. And if you know the price, you can bid 1 cent higher. And Google happened to have had a very important asset in this conversation, which is Google Ads, otherwise known as AdWords. Probably every one of your listeners knows what AdWords is, right? So AdWords is the world's largest repository of ads. There's nothing even close. I mean, Meta is close, but like Google Ads has millions and millions of accounts in every country in the world. So you can take that demand from the advertisers, and you have the data on the publisher side about what it will take to win, and you can snipe all the best ad spots and effectively buy and sell and measure, by the way, because they have Google Analytics and the other products on the buy side. So they buy, sell, and measure all the ads. And it doesn't take a genius, although they had many geniuses working on this, to sort of corner the market.
It's unbelievable to think about. No, I appreciate you setting it up that way. So there's always been something that sort of been in the back of my head, and that is that Google used to say, I believe it was do no evil. Right?
Yeah. Don't be evil.
Don't be evil. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So has something changed at the organization? Was there an ethical shift that we've seen from sort of an idealism to something that might have gone in a different direction?
Yeah, I struggled with this a bunch because I don't know that their actions in this market over the last 10 years and, the things that I was able to read because of all the court filings, I had access to inside emails, et cetera. They don't really cross the line to evil, I don't think. Okay. They're a bit abusive. That's why I use the word bullying. They bullied their way. And they did some things that were certainly not in the benefits of all their customers. For example, lowering bids on their publisher side so they'd win more, or raising bids on their buy side so they'd win more. It certainly hurt competition, but we're not crossing like a red ethical line too often. There's some you could have a really long debate about whether their actions were evil or just, I think they were clearly anti-competitive.
Okay. No, that's fair. And that's better to hear than I was worried about. So I think I read something that you have done a lot of interviews in preparation for this. Anything stand out to you about what came back from some of those conversations?
Yeah. And I think this was also the impetus to write the book, which is I spoke to about 70 people, many of whom were executives at companies that were Google clients, Google competitors, Google employees or former employees who many times wanted to be anonymous. And one thing that struck me was this sense of gaslighting, that folks felt that Google was being sort of arrogant, sanctimonious, and not telling the truth in many cases. And it really made people upset. There are some real emotions here. There are people who are saying, they lied to me. My account managers lied to my face. I spend millions of dollars with them every year on this ad serving technology. And they wouldn't do what I wanted, and they took things away, and they wouldn't tell me the truth. And what was interesting also is that a lot of the most shocking revelations about Google's activities in this market came out in the court filings way after they had already been, executed. And in some cases, they'd even been removed, so they were no longer intact. And when they finally came out, people were just shocked. The industry folks, the folks who use this technology on a day-to-day basis, were just dumbfounded by the fact that the worst things that people had thought Google was doing were true. Putting their finger on the scale, sort of cheating on auctions, otherwise just not telling the truth to their customers about their behaviors.
Wow. Okay. No, I didn't know that. So I know that there's been a tug and pull with regard to sort of antitrust and being in the courts a little bit. So what's your perspective on that? What are the risks and realities there?
Yeah, sure. So the current state is that they've been found to be a monopolist in the federal trial in Eastern Virginia. The remedies for that are going to start on September 22nd. And the DOJ is asking for a split up of these assets I've been discussing. So the ad server and the ad exchange, that's the part that matches ads. They're asking Google to split those out, and in some cases maybe open source parts of them so that there'll be competition in this ad serving market. But that's not the only thing that's happening. There's also a state antitrust case led by Texas that's starting in August in Texas. I'll be flying down there and sweating quite a bit in the Texas summer to follow that case. In that case, the states are being a bit more aggressive than the DOJ was about, billion-dollar fines and other types of activities. You have Europe asking them to split up, which is basically a foregone conclusion. You have Canada asking them to split up. There's also a private suit led by some of the largest publishers in the country, like the Daily Mail and Gannett, the owner of USA Today, that's in the New York and is going to go to trial in January. So this is all just relating to this advertising stuff. It has nothing to do with search. Search is under a different antitrust case where they've also been found to be a monopolist. And the search judge, Judge Mehta, is evaluating proposals to force a spin out of Chrome, the browser, into a separate company.
Yeah, so that one it was stunning to me because that, to me, I've read different articles based on certain things saying that would actually could be a problem for most people if they were to spin that out into something else, because the Chrome browser is something that I thought was generally open source anyways, because people were leveraging that. But do you see that being a problem, or do you think that's a good thing if they were to spin that out?
It's really questionable. I wish I could give you a really good answer. But yeah, so the Chromium is open source, but Chrome is not. And it is the number one browser, and people rely on it. And most of the revenue from any browser comes from search referral traffic, and that is also going to be banned in all likelihood by the judge. So the browser without that stream of revenue has a real questionable future. We all rely on it. So how do you maintain a browser, a robust browser, and continue R&D on that and improvements without access to that stream of revenue is a really open question. And then if you think, well, someone else could buy it, all the potential buyers would have the same conflicts of interest. You don't exactly want Amazon to own all the browsers in the world, right?
Right.
Not that they're a bad company, but they would have the exact same commercial interest that Google's being accused of having. So I think that Judge Mehta has a really tough set of decisions ahead of him.
Man, it's terribly complicated, unfortunately. So we start thinking about this a little bit more, and the implications of what could happen. Do you see, I know that this is a little bit looking into your crystal ball, but do you see that there could be a lot of changes within the advertising space because of these various suits and net results?
It's possible. I think there's a valid criticism that says a lot of this stuff is already baked in, and that the web advertising market in particular is quite mature. People are using the web less. There's less referral traffic coming from search and social. So the whole web world is sort of in a secular decline, and this is mostly focused on that. The optimistic point of view is that the control Google has had has stifled innovation. You couldn't, as an entrepreneur, start a new ad serving company tomorrow and sell to publishers. They would never even consider you because of this lock Google has. So removing the lock suddenly enables all kinds of innovation around helping publishers to make more money or to better service their customers or whatever. To give one example, Google just last week announced a thing called an offer wall as a product, which is offer wall. Many people might be familiar in the mobile world, is where you show the consumer like an offer, like, hey, watch this video and you can get access to our content, something like that, which is great. I'm glad Google's offering that. It's like 10 years too late. That product's been available in the mobile world from AppLovin and Chartboost and all those folks for years. And now we're waiting for the Google monopoly to get around to offering something like that. So I think that's an example of where we could see a lot more innovation. You could see people like Meta, who've been sitting on the sidelines and not involved in the open web much at all, maybe starting to invest. I'd love to see that.
Amazing. Okay. So when your name came across my desk, one of the biggest questions that popped into my head, and what I really would love to sort of talk about right now, is the future of advertising, right? So you have these models have been around for quite some time. So it's Web 2-ish, right? So now that we think about like Web 3 and what's going on with AI and all these things at the same time, how how are we looking at the future of advertising and the dominance that Google has currently, underpinned by all the stuff that's happening with like the AI model, so the chatbots, the ability to create new agents, things like this, and how do they now serve up advertising in those spaces? Do you see that changing dramatically, or do you think that this is sort of gonna be like an incremental change?
Yeah, it's going to be dramatic, but how to predict it is a little bit difficult. I think we're seeing this wholesale change from the Web 2.0, which was a movement that I think was fantastic, where people can create their own blogs, you can monetize them, make ads on them, you can buy search ads to drive traffic. That whole world is sort of going away. And the open web, as sometimes it's called, is becoming much less important. And what's instead happening is you have all these either walled gardens like Meta, or it's sometimes called hedged gardens like Spotify, where there are a bunch of ways to get to buy ads and to see ads on a product like Spotify or a product like Shopify. All these sort of big tech companies are building their own ad environments, and they're all powered by AI, or going to be soon. And so you end up in a world as a consumer. Hopefully, you'll start seeing better ads in your various environments that are relevant to you and maybe offer you things that are relevant. Maybe if you have AI agents doing your shopping, they're instead of showing ads, they're showing offers, and you can imagine a world where they're negotiating offers to different agents trying to figure things out. But I think that's a little far out for now. I think in the short term, what you end up with is the amount of advertising doesn't change. The amount of advertising is dependent mostly on GDP. And the advertising gets better. And Mark Zuckerberg said this. Mark Zuckerberg said recently that he thinks AI is going to get so good that the percentage of GDP spent on advertising is going to increase. Right? Which I'm not sure I believe, but it's an interesting thought experiment to think about. I'm glad Mark is thinking about things like that. But what you end up with is a lot of different types of advertising, a lot of different spots, and most of it underlying it is being powered by AI in some form.
Fascinating. Okay, so the last question I have that I'm just kind of curious about is, when we start talking about Web3, part of that is blockchain, and that is people owning their own assets or owning their own content and being able to sort of monetize that. Do you think that that actually does have legs, so to speak, or do you think that's something that's sort of so niche or niche that it's just not going to take off?
I've been sitting by the sidelines on crypto for the whole time. I'm still yet to see, valid use cases that are non-financial in nature. It really has had no impact at all on advertising to date. So what appears to be happening is that crypto, as it's maturing, is becoming an alternative to the U.S. dollar, maybe, or to transactional back-end software, which might be a good spot for it. But I don't think it changes the underlying nature of intellectual property, or the exchange of value that happens in advertising, for now at least.
So what about the scenario where everyone owns their own data and they were able to release it for let's say 30 days to a set number of advertisers who opt into those advertisers, and then
Yeah.
they get paid via that, and that model sort of gets much larger, it's decentralized, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I've written about this subject. I'm really bearish on that idea. Like,
Okay.
I think it's a really bad idea, just to be totally frank, and I'll explain why. First of all, people's attention is very distributed. Like, basically, you spend a lot of time on, say, a couple of social networks, and then after you get past this power law of the top 5 or 6 places you spend time, it goes really broad, really long tail, and so as a result, that value of your time on those spots is very little. It's very distributed. And the other thing is also true for an advertiser's perspective, which is your data is not really worth very much, except in 1 or 2 categories. So if I'm actively shopping for a car or a mortgage, my data is really valuable. And effectively, you can monetize that through a lead generation content if you tell us your info. Whereas doing that passively through like a browser plugin or some crypto thing, it just doesn't make sense because 99% of your data is not worth much at all.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that perspective, no question. All right, Ari, anything else that you'd like to mention about the book?
It's coming out August 5th. You can pre-order it on Amazon, etc. And I hope people enjoy it. It's supposed to be. It's not a textbook. It's enjoyable. It's like stories about people and their involvement and this whole kind of movement of publishers to gain independence from Google. So I think it's readable, and I hope people enjoy it.
Fantastic. All right. So the book again is Yield: How Google Bought, Built, and Bullied Its Way to Advertising Dominance. Ari, thank you so much for your time today. It was fantastic.
Of course. Thanks, Joe, for having me.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.